Hello, this is Gary Sly, and this is episode 2 of my Flosstube entitled The Legacy of Handmade Objects. I'm Gary Sly, and my shop is in Leesburg, Florida. It's called Gary Lee Sly Fabric Arts, and I'm in the shop this morning. It's a lovely sunshiny Monday. It's about noon on October the 16th. And yes, we do have a little cool weather in Florida, so I had my cardigan sweater on when I came in this morning. I want to start out by thanking folks for the wonderful responses that I've gotten. I am really humbled to think that people are spending 15-20 minutes of their time listening to what I have to say. I appreciate those folks who have subscribed thus far, and it was just wonderful reading your comments and your encouragement. It was real nice to have that, and I know that some of you would understand this, but putting yourself out there is a little bit scary. So I appreciate the positive reinforcement that I've received. One comment in particular I wanted to say something about. One person mentioned that unfortunately, because they were part of a huge family that lived on a farm, that they didn't have any handmade objects made by their mother. And I totally get that. You know, if you got 5 kids and you're running a farm, or for most of us at a period in life when our children are growing up, there's just not a lot of time for the kind of things that we who stitch and do other things with our hands have come to enjoy. You only do what you have to do. But I did want to say to that subscriber and also to kind of everybody that for me, cooking and culinary achievements are part of the handmade legacy as far as I'm concerned. Obviously with cooking and food, you're going to consume it and then it's gone. But I'll bet you every one of you can think of a particular recipe that your mother or that your grandmother created that you can almost still taste and smell today. And I love to cook, and I would say that one of the legacy I have from the women who were part of my family are family traditions of cooking. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother in particular, was a renowned cook, and every time I make a cherry cobbler using her recipe, or every time I attempt to replicate her fried chicken, I feel like she's there in the room with me. So to the comment about not having anything handmade, I'm guessing your mom was probably quite a cook, and that you have some memories from that. So I hope that's the case. A couple things I want to do today. I already had my program planned, and then I had to finish this week, and so I got to talk about that a little bit. So I'll veer off and talk some about the hand quilted piece that I've just finished. And then I want to talk some about the Embroidery Guild of America. I was away at a conference and a board meeting this past weekend with that group, and I want to talk just a little bit about the community of stitchers that's available to us. Sometimes it's online, sometimes it's in person, but it certainly is a great resource for all of us. So I want to dive in first and talk a little bit about a project that I've been working on this year. I don't really keep track always of how long it takes to do something, but I had a patron come into the shop, and she's been doing stamped cross stitch. It's actually a quilt that is queen sized, or even maybe would fit on a king size bed. And if I remember the story completely right, her mother used to do stamped cross stitch pieces, and so some of the squares of this quilt were actually done by her mother, and then she did the rest of them. Now, if you know about stamped cross stitch, it's a situation where a pattern is already on the fabric and you're covering the squares using X's, and in this case you're also doing the quilting using a pattern that's embossed or replicated on the fabric in some way. Now, this is the type of stamped cross stitch piece where once you wet this, all of the blue marking that I used in order to do the hand quilting is going to go away. So I'll just kind of put that up a little there where you can see what I did. These are 16 squares. Each square has 4 fleur-de-lis in the corners that you quilt, and then 56 of these little feathers, and then also a spoked wheel in the middle that you quilt. I don't do as much quilting as I do cross stitch and needlepoint, but I really kind of enjoyed this project. It was very soothing. The lines are there. I could make sure all of my stitches were perfect, or as near perfect as you can get with Handmade, and I really enjoyed it. Now I'm not going to pull this all the way out so you can see the full length of it, but there are 16 squares just like this, as I mentioned. And if you go on to my Instagram or my Facebook pages, you can see more pictures of that project. The reason I wanted to say something about it, I'm thrilled that it's done and it's going to go to its owner, and now she's going to finish the edges and turn it into a finished quilt. I get a lot of folks in the shop who tell me that they used to love cross stitch, but they can't see anymore, or they can't see well enough to do the kind of cross stitch that they used to use. And I just want to bring up the idea that for folks like that, sometimes stamped cross stitch is not a bad option. It might fulfill some of that yearning that they have for getting back into cross stitch. Now, it's not my purpose here to try to sell you on kits, but I was just looking around and I have some really nice stamped cross stitch designs. This one is a baby blanket with Noah's Ark on it. And if you can see up close, if the glare's not so bad, the stitching is embossed on it and you just cover the squares. Another thing that people tell me sometimes about counting cross stitch is they don't like counting. They want a design and they just want to cover that design. There's a beautiful Christmas tablecloth. It's a kit. It's got fabric and the threads in it. And these are kind of things you can do. So if you know somebody who's scared of counted cross stitch, there's a tablecloth, which is, again, a really pretty design. And everything is stamped on it. And it comes with all that you need. And this one is already finished. So all you have to do is stitch it and put it on your table. I just think it's a shame for people to give up something they love if their eyesight gets worse. And I think maybe too often we kind of get our nose in the air and we say, well, only if you stitch on linen or only if you use certain style of stitching are you a real stitcher. You know, back in the day when people needed things done and they wanted to add a little embellishment, they might not have had the time. As that subscriber I was telling you about mentioned, they might not have had the time to sit down and do a beautiful hand-stitched counted piece. They maybe needed to follow some directions and get it done quickly so they would have a tablecloth for their table. So look into stamped cross stitch if that's something that you're interested in, or maybe suggest it to folks who are just looking for new avenues. As I mentioned at the beginning, over the weekend I was at an Embroidery Guild of America board meeting. Our local region is the Sun region, which covers the state of Florida, and for the past 3 years I've been the treasurer for the Sun region, and on Saturday was installed as the assistant regional director. You know, there's nothing to brag about being officers. We're all volunteers. Usually nobody else would do it, and so we step up. But I don't know about you all, but I as a stitcher and as a kind of a personality, I'm pretty much an introvert. That doesn't mean that I don't like being around people, but it does mean that being in groups and spending a lot of time with people that I don't know especially is really draining for me. It really takes a lot of energy. When somebody said at the beginning of the pandemic that we were going to sit at home and not be able to go out unless we needed to, I know some people were pretty frustrated by that. I'm thinking, how much stitching can I get done? So as an introvert, I have found through the years that if I get involved in groups, and especially if I get involved with groups that have like interests to the ones that I have, it improves me as a person because I get outside of my own little box and I meet new people and I experience new things. But it also generally helps me in the craft or the experience that I'm a part of. Many stitchers are self-taught. Many of us just get a kit or a pattern someday. The newer stitchers, of course, go on YouTube and figure out how to do it from there. But there really nothing can replace one-on-one and group activities where you sit with other people who've been stitching for many years and you found out about best practices. I was going to teach a class at Joann's Fabric a few years back, and it was the first time I learned about the loop method for tying down your stitches on the back of your project. I had always done it where you just made the little train tracks and tied it down on the back, but in order to teach this class, they gave me a pretty strict set of instructions, and I learned how to do the loop method. And I'd probably been stitching for 40 years by that time. So it was just a matter of one simple little explanation, and it changed in a lot of ways the way I do my stitching. So I want to say that groups like the Embroidery Guild of America, there are many others that are associated with kind of every handmade craft, are a real asset, and they help us build this community of handmade artisans that we love to be a part of. I'm part of the local Quilters Guild here in Leesburg. I've served as an officer and been part of the Weavers of Orlando, which is our local Weavers Guild. And it forces me to get outside of my own little box and learn something about other people and advance the craft. I want to speak specifically about the Embroidery Guild of America because that's an experience I just left. There are two really big advantages to being part of something like EGA. The first is that you really get tied into a larger community, and that's people who have been stitching in many cases most of their lives and who have such a vast array of experience that they have to offer. Most of us who are members of EGA look forward to the monthly magazine that comes, so that even if we're not part of an actual meeting group in a particular period of time, we can kind of see what's going on in the various chapters, and we learn some new skills and projects. So community is real important. I think EGA, like most guilds and craft groups, faces the challenge of how to stay relevant, how to make sure that they're doing things to attract newer generations. We don't want to die out. We want new stitchers and new craftsmen to be coming along behind us. I know they're out there. I have young people come in the shop all the time. They're looking to do different things than maybe what we might have done when we were coming up at that age. But in a lot of ways, they're looking for the same challenges and opportunities as what we had. So one of the challenges for a group of embroiderers like EGA is how to attract the next generation. I was thrilled to hear that there's a group at the University of Virginia, which is my alma mater, who are becoming sort of affiliate members of EGA and who are going to pick up and advance the craft in the very unique way that their generation has of taking it. Be prepared when you have younger stitchers. They're going to want to stitch different things. They love to shock us, just like we love to shock our parents and grandparents. And so sometimes the things they stitch are going to make your eyes widen just a little bit, but that's all kind of part of the process. The other aspect of EGA, which I value immensely, is a tying back to the legacy of this wonderful heritage of stitching that we have, and connecting us to the people who founded some of this work. Many of you are familiar with an organization like the Royal School of Needlecraft in England that really has researched and brought forward stitching from back in the Middle Ages. I've been involved in a program at EGA called the Master Craftsman's Program, where you complete a series of projects and you are then certified as a master craftsman. In my case, if I ever get through it, it will be for counted thread embroidery or cross stitch, if you want to think about it that way. The first project that I finished and completed and did well on was to design a sampler. For that project, I could either design one completely from scratch or I could adapt an existing sampler. And I was lucky enough that my wife's family had a sampler from the 1830s. So I took that sampler and created one for the wedding of my oldest son and his husband Dan a few years back. And I adapted the sampler to include the two families coming together and a lot of the symbolism that was important to them. Dan, my son-in-law, has Jewish heritage, and so I did some research and included a vintage Hebrew alphabet on the sampler that I designed. If I can figure out how to do it, I will include a picture of that in some kind of way, but if not, I will leave it as a description at this point, and maybe I can find a way to share it another time because it hangs on the wall in my son's home. The second project, which I am designing and getting prepared for now, is where I do a CC stitching, which the best way I know to describe a CC is we're kind of doing it backwards. Rather than filling in the design in the middle like we usually do with counted cross stitch, we're using the CC method and creating the borders and the boundaries of our design and leaving the inside blank. Look up a CC stitching if you have some interest in what that involves. And then the second part of it is that I will be designing a Holbein border. Holbein was a man who stitched and did a lot of painting during the time of Henry VIII and around that period in British history. And the point of a Holbein stitch is that the front has to look exactly like the back. Since I'm designing it myself this time, I decided to try to find some things that were meaningful to me. Just before the pandemic, my youngest son and I took a trip to India, and we visited the Red Fort in New Delhi. And one of the pictures I took was of some of the masonry work or the design work at the Red Fort in Delhi. And so my Holbein stitch, which I have been working on designing, I haven't actually started yet, is going to be a version of that lattice work that I found at the Red Fort in New Delhi. Haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do in the middle yet for my Assisi, but that's all part of the process, is figuring out what's meaningful to you and how to make that happen. So my point for me is that sometimes I just want to sit down and have fun and stitch and not pay any attention to it, but I do value the traditions that have come forward. The Holbein stitch, the Assisi stitching, the great legacy of samplers that has come down to us. And an organization like the Embroidery Guild of America has given me the opportunity to be involved in a program where I can learn some of that, so that I have best practices, so that I know some standards. Do I always stitch perfectly? Do I always make myself toe the line for those standards? Not at all. I always want to enjoy what I'm doing, but sometimes I'll take the time to make it as close to perfect as handmade can be. So let me encourage you to find out about groups in your area, local stitching groups. Look into the various guilds or the Embroidery Guild of America or whatever craft it is that you're involved in, and find out who's doing that sort of thing. It really is a great advantage for us to find a community of craftsmen, or stitchers in this case, who can help guide us and give us encouragement. So with that, I want to end today's discussion. I hope you'll continue to send me feedback. If you have questions or if there's things that I can talk about in my next episode, I'm happy to do that. Until then, this is Gary Sly, the legacy of Handmade Objects saying goodbye and have a wonderful week.